Good evening, everybody. My name is Dick Clay, and I'm the president and the CEO of the Filson Historical Society. I am so glad that you all are able to join us this evening. And we would like to thank the Thomas W. Bullitt Perpetual Charitable Trust for sponsoring this evening's lecture. I'm happy to introduce one of tonight's speakers, Kimberly Gartz Crum. Kim enjoyed a social work career before she became a creative writer. Now she is the sole proprietor of Shape and Flow Writing Instruction, a studio located in a repurposed slaughterhouse. There she teaches memoir and personal essay to aspiring writers who want to tell true stories for posterity or for publication. Kim has published in journalistic, literary, and academic venues. She's working on the final draft of a segmented memoir titled Slouching Toward Self-Actualization. I'll now turn the program over to Kim, who will introduce the rest of tonight's speakers. Now, these speakers who will be talking about the Boom Project have worked hard on it. And this is a marvelous anthology of poetry, essay, memoir, and fiction by 47 selected authors from the baby boom generation. That's me. Anyway, Kim, I am now turning this over to you to introduce the rest of tonight's speakers, and then I'll rejoin everybody after the presentation to moderate questions as time permits. I guarantee everyone who's tuned in tonight, you're going to love tonight's program. Thank you. Kim?
Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to introduce you first to my co-editor, Bonnie Omer Johnson, who is the beautiful blonde on the left side of this picture. This is when our book first came out after 3 years of sort of thought and work, and we went to Carmichael's to pose with it. This is the Boom Project, and Bonnie Omer Johnson is, I'll give you her bio. She claims to have river water running through her veins, having lived more years than not on the Ohio River, but also in cities along the Missouri, the James, and the St. Johns rivers. Since receiving her MFA at Spalding University in her mid-50s, she taught at Kaiser University, Owensboro Community and Technical College, and Bellarmine University in Louisville. And she is the owner of a writing workshop business called The Right Place in Brownsboro Center right here in Louisville. These are a few of our writers in Louisville at the Carmichael's reading we had way back in January, and a few of our members of our audience. We're proud of all of our writers and the people who are here tonight. We're glad to invite from locations other than Louisville, since we have this Zoom opportunity. The first person, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to introduce everyone at once, each writer in the order of their appearance, and then they will then turn the gauntlet over to the next when their reading ends. As Mr. Clay had said, we have essays, poems, memoir, and short fiction in the book, and there are 4 representatives of those genres here tonight. The first is Kari Gunter-Seymour. She comes from Albany, Ohio, near Athens, where the University of Ohio is, and she is the Ohio Poet Laureate. She has 3 poems featured in the Boom Project anthology, and her most recent poetry collection is A Place So Deep Inside America It Can't Be Seen. A poem she wrote in support of families living in poverty in Athens County, Ohio went viral, viewed by more than 100,000 people, resulting in thousands of dollars donated to her local food pantry. Carrie is a pushcart nominee and the Best of the Net nominee, as well as the 2020 Ohio Poet of the Year. After Carrie, we'll go Mick Puckett. Michael Mick Puckett is actually a resident of Louisville. He spent his youth in the woods and along streams and rivers in Fern Creek, Kentucky. And in his work life, Mick recorded albums for many Kentucky musicians in his studio, reel-to-reel recording. He taught middle school science and biology at Indiana University Southeast. And in his retirement, Mick is a volunteer for Raptor Rehabilitation of Kentucky, where he treats and releases into the wild owls, hawks, falcons, eagles, and vultures. Next up is the man in the middle, Mark Williams. Mark Williams is a poet and prose writer from Evansville, Indiana. His short fiction in the Boom Project is a delightful coming-of-age story titled Bombs Away. Mark's poems have appeared in the Southern Review, Rattle, and the New Ohio Review. His fiction has appeared in Indiana Review and the anthologies and American Fiction. His novella, Shangri-La, is forthcoming in Running Wild Novella Anthology. And finally, Sheila Carter-Jones is a poet from Pittsburgh, who joins us tonight, and the author of 2 books, 3 Birds Deep and The Blackberry Cobbler Song. Her chapbook, Crooked Star Dream Book, was honorable mention for the 2013 New York Center for Book Arts Chapbook Contest. Sheila has a BA from Carnegie Mellon University, an MED and PhD from the University of Pittsburgh, and an MFA from Carlow University. She is working on a new full-length manuscript of poems as well as a memoir. So I'm going to turn it over to the readers, beginning with our Ohio Poet Laureate, Kari Gunter-Seymour.
Perfect pitch. I rode middle school bound in the back seat of Fanny June's station wagon, listening to her and her sister sing Jolene, trading verses, harmonizing on the chorus. I'm begging of you, please don't take my man. A few years later, it was 925. They were fired up and it was Dolly's doing. This was rural Ohio, the bottom lip of northern Appalachia, right shy of Perry Como country. The women in the family worked the TS trim factory, spitting out Honda car parts. Started out on the assembly line, worked their way up to paint, then detailing, then welding. The physical labor made their bodies strong, their future bright, and like Dolly, they weren't taking any shit. They learned early on about strikes and picket lines, how important it was to organize and vote. Brave women in the workforce, determined to see their daughters inside college classrooms the hell out of Factory Row. I didn't know then that I was under the wing of a feminist taking back her power. Like Dolly, Fanny June would never use that word, no matter how much she embodied it. She was proud to hang up her welder's helmet end of shift, pick up her paycheck, sing in the front seat of a station wagon with women she loved. Well, I have to say, I'm so pleased to be here tonight with all of you and also in celebration of the Boom Project, and to be reading with my fellow poet and writers. And I just wanted to take a moment to thank Kim and Bonnie for their enthusiasm, their creativity, and their steadfast determination to birth and promote the Boom Project. I mean, not even a pandemic could hold these 2 women back. And Kim asked me to take a few minutes to talk about my duties as Poet Laureate of Ohio. So I am the 3rd actual Poet Laureate, and Governor DeWine asked that I lift up Appalachia as I travel about. I'm a 9th generation Appalachian. In the early 1700s, my people migrated from Kentbury, Berkshire, England to Henrico, Virginia to find work mining coal and iron. And my descendants then from there went on to North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, and then Ohio, where my parents settled. My poet laureate duties have taken me virtually, of course, throughout Ohio and a variety of other states to read and teach workshops and spread the good word about Ohio and Appalachia. But by far, my finest service has been to provide workshops to incarcerated teens and adults and women in recovery programs across Ohio. Very proud of that and so pleased and honored to serve. So my next poem is directly from the Boom anthology, and it's called Everything Tilts. And there's a small epigraph. You measure a democracy by the freedom it gives its dissidents. Abby Hoffman. A clutch of adjectives and the term disillusioned to speak of us. Paislied and flower painted, our frankness spread by mouths and underground presses. Ho ho, hey hey, how many babies have you killed today? Stern winds. Night walked freely the ranks of the sun, choked under a pillow of clouds. 4 bodies, shadows long, streets smeared and lost. What became of us once we'd been torn apart and returned to our future, reduced to radical clearness? How fragile the axis upon which everything tilts, left to its own dank devices. Come on, people now. Smile on your brother. Everybody get together. Try and love one another right now. So I will leave you with one last piece, and I thank you for your kind attention. And as you hear this poem, you'll realize this is definitely a boomer poem. And it's called Of Mud and Beauty. We was concoctors, princesses of Montymoo, devotees of Wadiwa, wearers of bare feet, our crowns garlands of black-eyed Susan and orange butterfly weed, finger swipes of fresh squished blackberries striped across our freckled faces. Scoopers of loam beside the creek, we conjured our recipe from scratch in a weather-beaten bucket, plucks of yarrow, pink clover blossoms, spider webs, toadstools, clumps of lime green moss, a gnurly branch of sassafras to stir the pot. Chanting language known only to the Wadiwa, our harvest transformed into a goopy chunkarama, smelling of rot, herb, and adolescent female sweat. Spreading it fearlessly, ear to ear, as described in Teen Magazine, we laid ourselves down beneath white bark pines to cure. Giddy as Miss America contestants, a scrap of fabric crisscrossed around our heads like a swami, like queens of the Nile. We lay still as sticks in the promise of sculpted cheekbones in a fiery afterglow. Until deer flies besieged us, blood-sucking party poopers, their stinkometers catching wind of our heady home brew. They wheedled our lips, our nose holes, teensy scissor mouths nipping. Believing they was haints sent to hold us back from our rightful life of glamour, we ran like wild pixies to the fat bottom breast of the creek, baptized our magnificent selves in the name of Montymoo. Thank you all so much. for receiving me tonight. I've had the best time. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce our next reader, Mick Puckett.
Hi, this is called Curious Times and Big Brass Balls. University of Kentucky campus, May 1970, Kent State +2. It was a beautiful morning. One of those mornings when the spring sunshine and fresh air cleansed of yesterday's tear gas made a person happy to be alive. I was on the way to my anthropology final, blue book under my arm, with the intention of joining the ongoing student anti-war demonstrations after the test. Kentucky wasn't exactly the hotbed of 60s radicalism that Governor Nunn would have had folks believe. The protest marches that spring had been exceptionally peaceful and sometimes rather enjoyable. Strange considering the looming threat of the draft and the war. Since the massacre at Kent State, however, it was now so very much more personal. The demonstrations on campus had taken a turn, become a bit rowdier and much more serious. The night before, while a boisterous student rally was held at what was then the ROTC building, a suspicious fire had been started in an old warehouse across campus. Though few were even aware of it, the burned building had a tiny faded old sign over one door reading Air Force ROTC. Arson, student protesters burn ROTC building, was the large bold headline in the Herald Leader the next morning. The ensuing fire had officially been blamed on the students, and a young woman walking close to the building had been charged with arson. Evidence presented in the coming weeks, however, would suggest that the university had possibly taken advantage of circumstances to clear the space for a new parking lot for the basketball team. The state police and National Guard had been mobilized to deal with the protesters and were now using pepper gas, tear gas, nightsticks with liberal abandon. It was tense to say the least. Still a couple blocks from campus, I noticed the familiar squawk of a bullhorn. Things were beginning early. I turned the corner and saw a few students in the distance running from police. I wanted to be there, but wasn't going to risk missing the easy final. I deliberately walked in a slightly different direction, a more direct route to the building where I'd be taking my test. Approaching a cross street next to campus, I heard a loud clomping sound and turned to see an enormous state policeman, 6'5" or 6 inches, riot helmeted and wearing a gas mask, barreling toward me at full gallop, swinging a nightstick in a circular motion over his head. Momentarily stunned by the sight, I hesitated a second or two before taking off, running as fast as I could, and it almost escaped before being struck a glancing blow to the head. Thankfully, his attention was then diverted, and he sprinted toward another hapless soul walking down the sidewalk. How very strange. This was bizarre. However much I deserved this on other occasions, I'd only been walking to school with long hair for the sole purpose of taking my exam. I sat on the sidewalk, still a bit dazed, feeling a large knot rising on the back of my head, and flinched as someone approached, muttering from behind. I turned toward the voice. "Oh, what? Sorry, I didn't hear you." A middle-aged man with dark, close-cropped hair, a prominent beer gut, and bloody wife-beater t-shirt walked up beside me, bleeding from a gash in his forehead. Jesus H. Christ. I saw that big sumbitch coming with me with that club, and my asshole drawed up, just drawed up tight. Never happened to you, boy? I can't say I've ever really thought about it, but it sounds reasonable. This guy looked like the biggest redneck I'd ever seen. A lot like some of the crazies who'd come into town from Winchester or Mount Sterling to beat up the long hairs on a Friday night. Someone who I would run from on a normal evening. Head wound notwithstanding, he was also bleeding profusely from his ear. I took off my shirt and handed it to him. Here, you need to take care of your head and ear. He absently took my t-shirt, sat down beside me and dabbed at his head, seemingly surprised at how much he was bleeding. Hey boy, you got a hell of a goose egg sprouting up through all that hair. He gave me a friendly shove. My head was getting really sore. I heard how y'all trying to stop that goddamn war and came to join up with you. He offered me his bloody hand. I'm Ray Sizemore. My boy's over there now, and I ain't never been so scared in my life. All our young'uns are dying over them Viet Congs that ain't done nothing to any of us. We gotta stop that foolish shit. I couldn't agree more, Ray. I turned and noticed the tears. Ray was beginning to quietly sob, not from the terrible beating he'd just taken. That was nothing compared to the anguish he was feeling about his son. I love my boy, accenting the words love and boy. It was curious how experiencing something as random and insane as that morning's events could suddenly humanize a complete stranger, bypassing all the political or philosophical or cultural obstructions that normally divide people. He'd given me a small glimpse into his soul with his short statement, and I suddenly felt as connected, as close to Ray as to anyone I knew. My heart was absolutely breaking for him. By the time we'd cleaned each other up, exchanged addresses, and headed our separate ways, I wondered if we'd ever meet again. Life tends to be cruel that way more often than not. I'd missed my exam at that point. My head was throbbing, the result of my earlier attempt to avoid trouble. This time my choice was different. I headed in the direction of the student center where the climax to the week's demonstrations was underway. Two lines formed along an open lawn at the edge of campus. The National Guard and State Police in gas masks and riot gear on one side, and students on the other. The National Guardsmen, I noticed, were just a bunch of frightened kids, most of them our age. Actually, they were just like us, except they had families with enough money or political clout to avoid the draft by joining the swollen ranks of the National Guard. Oh, but they were armed and they were frightened. And after the Kent State killings, it seemed that a reasonable and appropriate response had been taken off the table. The state police were itching for a fight, having been wearing gas masks and body armor for a couple of very warm days, and were surely sick of taking shit from a bunch of hippie kids. The student protesters were surprisingly peaceful, but in all fairness, had been shouting and chanting some rather rude and unkind things at the opposition, resulting in a complete standoff. This day, however, under orders from the governor, the National Guardsmen chambered live ammunition, fixed bayonets, seriously, and announced they would drive the students from the campus by force. The atmosphere grew more and more tense. I could actually imagine Kent State happening again. As the guardsmen began moving forward in a line, prodding any stragglers with bayonets, someone on a bullhorn announced that the Baptist seminary across the street had given permission for the students to enter their private property. This was the only way out. 1,000+ students rushed across the street, followed by several tear gas canisters. For the next hour or two, the situation appeared hopeless as each side defending territory hurled insults and an occasional projectile across the street at their antagonists. It was very faint at first. That sound, was it music? Nah, it couldn't be. Just random sounds carried by the breeze. Right there it was again. A vaguely familiar sound, but what? Over a span of 2 or 3 minutes, the sound wafted in and out until finally it struck the ear with more definition. Yes, there it was. A calliope? What in the world? A calliope playing the wheels on the bus go round and round? Seriously. Whoa, maybe that last joint was a bit over the line. As the music got louder, we finally spotted the source. No way, this couldn't be happening. A Mr. Softy ice cream truck turned from a small side street onto the blocked off limestone street, recorded music blaring from a horn-shaped speaker on its roof. It drove directly between the two warring factions and slowly pulled into the driveway of the seminary. The driver, joint in mouth, waving at the crowd. The situation, having hovered in the dire to hopeless crisis mode for hours, was suddenly diffused and quickly turned into an all-inclusive party. Crisis was averted as everyone on both sides of the street broke ranks and loaded up on Mr. Softy ice cream. Students, state police, National Guardsmen, everyone was suddenly beginning to mix together. Later even sharing a large Ho Chi Minh birthday cake brought by some students. The powder keg had been smothered in soft whip ice cream, thanks to the brassiest of balls and utterly stone countenance of the enterprising young businessman whose risky decision had paid off handsomely. I actually did see my new friend Ray, of the drawn up asshole, once more a couple weeks later at a rally. He'd lost the hearing in the ear that had been bleeding so profusely from the beating he took. But Ray was ecstatic. He had just heard from his son, who'd been wounded in Nam. What a godsend, said Ray. My boy's finally coming home. Now I'd like to introduce one of my new favorite authors from Evansville, Mark Williams.
Thanks, Mick. That was great. I'd like to read an excerpt from my story, Bombs Away, which I'm grateful to say appears in the Boom Project. Bombs Away takes place in 1950s Clarksville, Indiana, where 14-year-old Wendell Stone and his buddy, Winky Dinks, are trying to become members of the $500 Club by stealing $500 worth of merchandise. One night, Wendell sneaks out of his house and climbs into his friend Helen Clark's bedroom window when she and her parents are away. He plans to steal her radio and buy her a new one after he's in the club. Years later, Wendell and Helen will marry, and this night will save their marriage in an unexpected way. But tonight, before he takes Helen's radio, he goes into her parents' room and steals her father's Army Air Corps bombardier wings, which happen to look just like my father's. As Wendell re-enters Helen's room, the Clarks come home. "Good night, Mother. Good night, Daddy," calls Helen. "Sleep tight. Don't let the bedbugs bite," shouts Mr. Clark as Wendell, who can't believe he shut Helen's window after entering, scurries under Helen's bed. "Oh, Daddy, here, Miss Kitty," calls Helen. At any other time, Wendell would have had visions of Gunsmoke's Miss Kitty. She has a classy chassis. He suspects she offers Marshall Dillon more than drinks. But here beneath Helen's bed, chin on shag, Wendell remembers seeing a calico cat run from Helen's room as he'd eased into her window. Peeking out the space beneath the ruffle, Wendell sees this Miss Kitty trot from the hall into the bedroom on the heels of Helen's Oxford saddles. "There's my good kitty," says Helen, chanking the ballerina's chain, then lifting Miss Kitty from view. "Mommy has to take her shoes off, my little sweet," says Helen. "Doesums want to hear some music?"
Now, meows Miss Kitty. Wendell has never heard Helen talk like this, baby talk, and to a cat. And he's never heard a cat cry, now, nor has he ever been this close to Helen, aside from a fortuitous bump while playing flashlight tag in the St. Lawrence churchyard. I better hold my breath. She could feel me breathing on her legs, thinks Wendell, staring at the strip of flesh between bobby socks and blue jean cuffs. Helen, turn that radio off, yells Mrs. Clark. But it's Ricky Nelson, cries Helen. I don't care if it's Tennessee Ernie Ford. Time for bed. With that, Helen jumps onto the floor and blue jeans puddle around her ankles. Bare ankles. Part of Wendell is saying, step away from the bed, while the other part is saying, I should close my eyes. But before she steps away or he closes his eyes, Helen leaps into the air, the box springs sink, and with a chank, her room goes dark. Earlier tonight, Wendell had told his parents he was bushed, that he was turning in. I'm gonna get some shut-eye, he persisted. Let me feel your forehead, hon, said Wendell's mother. Lying under Helen's bed, Wendell is certain his parents had not heard his bedroom window creak. He'd waited a good 5 minutes before jumping into the viburnum. His parents wouldn't miss him until morning. With this thought, Wendell lifts his chin from the shag and rests his right cheek on the bridge of his laced fingers. When Helen goes to sleep, he'll slip out, no sweat. Until then, he might as well get some shut-eye. Good night, my little, says Helen. Now! In Wendell's dream, he's falling through the night sky on the bombardier wings in his pocket. Either I've shrunk or the wings are ginormous, Dream Wendell thinks. Legs astride the bomb, silver wings on either side. In the darkness, it's impossible for him to gauge how high he is or how quickly he's falling, breaking through clouds he had not known were there. From this distance, Dream Wendell can make out 3 clumps of light. Somehow, he knows the clump to his left is Cincinnati. The clump to his right, Naptown. Straight ahead is home. Dream Wendell hopes he doesn't land in Naptown. Except for the Indy 500, who would want to land there? But glancing down at Naptown, he leans to the right. And by gosh, he's heading for Naptown, shining ever brighter as he falls. With his newfound sense of navigation, he leans to the left. Somewhere in that clump lies Crosley Field. He suspects Crosley Field might be contributing to the light clump. The Redlegs might be playing. He could land at second base beside Johnny Temple. If these are Bill Clark's actual wings, no one, not even Johnny, will notice. Unless he hits Johnny. After all, he's still getting the hang of navigation. And these little wings, if they are little, are sharp. And what if the wings are ginormous and he hits Johnny? Aside from Johnny, the Reds are weak at second base. Straightening, then leaning forward on the wings, he heads for home. Now! Dream Wendell would expect the wind to sound more like whoosh than now. He'd expect it to sound louder. Why does he only feel the wind on his left ear? Now! As if in answer to the wind's demand, Louisville separates into a clump of Louisville on one side and a clump of Jeffersonville, Clarksville, and New Albany on the other, separated by a barge-lit Ohio River. He leans to the right, toward that clump's center. Now! Wind sound increasing, the Jeffersonville, Clarksville, New Albany light clump breaks into thousands, the lights of individual houses coming closer. Closer! How is he going to stop this thing? Do I pull up on this? He thinks, gripping the bomb's nose just as St. Lawrence Court, and in the center, St. Lawrence Church, and in the center of that, the St. Lawrence Church steeple, way pointier than expected, looms immediately below. Now! A veteran dreamer, Wendell decides this would be a good time to wake up. What with the annoying wind, looming steeple, and scratchy sandpaper sanding his left cheek. Here, Miss Kitty, a voice cries from somewhere. Helen? Wendell blurts, eye to cat eye. Hi, Wendell, answers Helen from above. Where am I? Asks Wendell, disoriented from his dreamy fall through space. Underneath my bed. Oh, says Wendell, as the springs above his head shift slightly. What am I doing here? Robbing us, I guess. I know about your stupid club. Ouch, says Wendell. That hurts. Feels like sandpaper, doesn't it? Thanks to Miss Kitty's tongue, Wendell gathers his wits quickly. How do you know about our club? But before Helen can answer, from somewhere in the house, the phone rings. I wonder who that is, says Helen. It's after 1 o'clock. Geez Louise, says Wendell. 1 o'clock? I think you fell asleep. Here, Miss Kitty. Helen, Mr. Clark shouts, opening the bedroom door. Wake up. The Stone Boy's gone missing. Do you know where he is? He asks as the room outside the ruffle fills with light and Miss Kitty zips from view. Do you know where Wendell is, Miss Kitty? Asks Helen. Listen here, young lady. This isn't funny. His mother went in to feel the boy's head and found his bed empty. The Dinks kid's missing too. If you know anything. Sometimes they ride their bikes to Shangri-La, says Helen. Shangri-La? Winky's river camp. Oh, yeah, thanks, honey. Now get to sleep. Oh, and have you seen my wings? They're missing from my drawer. Have you seen Daddy's wings, my little sweet? Very funny. Marge, the girl says they've gone to Shangri-La. Bill Clark yells as his pajamas disappear from view and a door slams shut. Now, beneath Helen's bed for almost 3 hours, Wendell hears a car honk twice. Bombs away, Mr. Clark shouts from a distance. Why'd your dad yell that? Asks Wendell, turning onto his back, repositioning the wings inside his pocket. He says that when he's going somewhere important. Oh, says Wendell, where's he going? To Shangri-La with your dad, genius, to look for you and Winky. First, they'll pick up Mr. Dinks. How do you know all that? You have x-ray eyes or what? Wendell asks, staring at the springs between slats. I recognized your car honk. Oh, well, I guess I'd better be going, says Wendell, scooching through the ruffle with his heels. See you later, says Helen as Wendell stands and turns toward her, sheet up to her shoulders, cattail around her neck. Winky, Helen hisses. If you're in here, you better get out too. You had your chance. Sheesh, a voice says from inside Helen's closet. And next, reading from Pittsburgh, Sheila Carter-Jones.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you to the Filson Historical Society and the Boom Project for this opportunity to share my work. I've decided to read some poems about some men and boys that I've known, and it's about 3 poems. My first poem is titled, My Brother on Earth. He was the quiet one, the left-handed one, but that's not how I knew he was going to be the first one of us to die. It wasn't that nearly every summer he stepped on a rotted piece of board and got a rusty nail stuck in his foot, or when he was setting a rabbit trap in the backyard garden and almost got a finger snapped off, testing how fast the metal trigger could spring and make a quick catch. Sometimes he cried, but not all the way. Tears at the rims of his eyelids were just enough to let me feel what he held inside. I thought he was brave not to show all the hurt. Seeing one tear stream over his cheek and to his chin when he came home from 2 tours in the Vietnam War is when I knew. I could feel how much he ached. I knew he couldn't hold it all, and I didn't know for how long, only that he was going to be first. There was a keloid of flesh on his inner left forearm, shaped like a sun. The proliferation of scar tissue shot out as blistery rays where he had been wounded. It was smooth and looked tender enough to split open with a slight poke. It marked him like words on a headstone. The air around him was different, thinner, harder to breathe in. I didn't have the fresh feel of low mist on bare legs as we hiked over scattered leaves and pine needles in the woods after a storm, or the faint shimmer of purple rising from violets he pulled from damp soil and ate handfuls. Even as tiny clumps of dirt clung to the roots, I knew him best when he laughed with a mouthful of wildflowers. My next poem is I Remember a Boy. I never called him Charles or Charlie. I called him Bobo, or Bo for short. His laugh gurgled as if he was underwater and the current was overtaking him, pulling faster and deeper. He hardly had time to gulp a breath before being swept up. His slender, sturdy hands made the best stick dolls from scrap and wood and curled shavings thrown in a heap of sawdust outside Bell's sawmill. On lucky days, we sifted through and found tapered sticks as long as 10 inches. On the wider ends, we nailed strands of unbraided clothesline for hair and inked on a face. None were ever sad. And we covered their bodies from neck to knee in dresses made from pieces of our own old clothes. We never made men. Years later, I took a side street shortcut driving to work. A woman was sitting on a grassy hillside, legs stretched out, crossed at the ankles. It was the hair that got me. I didn't know until not even 4 seconds past her. The sun hit my eyes in an instant brilliant burst of familiarity. Silky peach blonde hair outlining her face, then flowing to small finger-rolled ringlets dangling, an obvious wig, a low-cut dress, not revealing. I couldn't stop with cars closing in on my bumper, drivers honking, threatening horns. No slowing and no place to pull over on this narrow city street. Next morning, same time, and 3 more mornings, and all the mornings of the next week, I drove past empty grass. Maybe the day I saw her, she had an early doctor's appointment, was going in early to work, or maybe she recognized me too and remembered how we made dolls together. My last poem, I want to say a little bit before I read that. And I have to tell you that my father was beaten by police in 1965 and put in a state hospital for the criminally insane because he was a Black man with a voice. In this poem, you will hear the phrase "gone dead." It is a concept I created to mean several conditions or locations. However, in this poem, it is a place in between where men have been conveniently tucked away as troublemakers. And the title of this poem is Father and Sons. Out of the gone dead sanctuary comes a man with the dream of free. Beneath the flesh and inside his bones is the marrow of future. Though his shoulders curl inward, I ache to see his bare, muscular back bent under the hood of his red pickup, the one he painted his name on by hand to show ownership. He added, and sons, with hope to pass on not a landscaping business, but ability to belong to oneself. My brothers laughed when they saw it, each falling into the other, their boy bodies hugging in their frailty. I did not laugh. I could see what my father's eyes held. Though I am not a boy, I picked up the rake, dragged its rusted teeth across a patch of wilted brown grass. In each small ditch of earth, I placed seeds, covered them with dirt, offered handfuls of water to quench a thirst. My brothers would never dream as free as my father did, to reseed, begin again from soil and endure tenderness of new growth. Cut and shape bare twigs of forsythia to prepare for the impossibly yellow blossoms. Dig up half-wit stumps. Plant 2 yew trees with roots that grow straight through eyes of the dead. Hold them tethered in their down under. They can never be green again. No ambition to unload the dump of teeming manure. Shovel shit never, my brother said. Will not plant geraniums and peonies ever. And one small detail is the phone number painted on the truck. They knew it by heart. Thank you. And now I'd like to turn it over to the director for a Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you all. Sheila, I'll start out with a question for you. And that is the phrase in the last poem, the ability to belong to oneself, just resonated with me because I think in this time of COVID, of protest, of political unrest and disagreement, that phrase resonates, an ability to belong to oneself. Could you elaborate on that?
I think what I'm trying to portray is that my dad, who was actually beaten in 1965 and taken away, that because of his voice, that somebody—
How old were you?
About 14 or 15 years old. And so that ability to belong to oneself is to have the impetus that within your own mind, your own, a sense of being, that you are free. Your spirit is free, which can never be contained. So the ability to have the strength of mind and heart to know that you are free within your own life.
Yeah.
And no matter what anybody does to you, they cannot disturb your freedom because of your depth of spirituality.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then Carrie, at one point I texted one of my Filson coworkers, and I think it was, I've forgotten the phrase. Well, here, I'll look it up because I loved it. I just loved it. Yes, spider worms, toadstools. And I said, this is an Appalachian Midsummer Night's Dream. The imagery, and you're in Albany, Ohio, near Athens at Ohio University, which is such a gorgeous school. Tell me a little bit more about your imagery, and do you see elements of Shakespeare in your writing and your thought?
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you for that. I'm sure Mr. Shakespeare is turning in his grave that you have said that, but I'm honored. I grew up in Amesville, Ohio, which is also near Athens, Ohio. And I was of the boomer generation that lived out in the country. My grandparents were sustaining farmers, and I ran like a wild child all day long, every summer. And we ran in a pack, all the local kids, and we did these things. We created mud pies and potions, and I would love to say that we made this beauty potion. We didn't actually do that, but it was easy for me to imagine that because we had done everything except that. I mean, I do remember one day us putting mud on our faces because we heard that could make us more beautiful. But yeah, we just ran like pixies, literally, all summer long, and it was safe. There was no one to harm us. We were country kids, and that's what comes back to me, is that wildness and those things that we discovered as tweens, and collected, like the clover blossoms and the herbs, the wild herbs, the mint and the yarrow and all of these things. Sassafras, finding a wonderful sassafras branch that had the twisty curls in
Or
it.
the roots that you could make tea from.
Yes.
Where
And
were
it
you
was such
living?
an honor.
Where were you living at the time?
I lived in Amesville proper, which is a very tiny little village. about 11 miles from Athens, Ohio. But
Yeah.
my grandparents' farm, I could walk to my grandparents' farm from our little village. And that's where I spent most of my time. And there were hired helpers on the farm, and they had children. And we all, like I said, ran like wild pixies.
For me, back then, it was the summer of 1971, and I'd gone to a liberal arts college in North Carolina, Davidson, and I was living in Dayton, Ohio, in the downtown YMCA. For $13.50 a week, and I was a house painter on Wright-Patterson Air Force Base that summer. A friend of mine from Davidson had grown up in Dayton, and he was living the dream in Yellow Springs, Ohio, as a bartender. And I remember that beautiful Ohio, Southern Ohio countryside, the cornfields and that was back when I didn't have air conditioning in my car. I couldn't afford a car with that. But so all the windows were down and I could smell the corn in the evenings. And it was a magical time. And I think you caught it with that poem. Then along these lines for you, Emma Bryan, who is this wonderful person who works at the Filson, asks, what are the responsibilities of Ohio's Poet Laureate?
Well, I did speak a little bit about that. There are no steadfast responsibilities in terms of you must do this, this, this. I am asked to do 20 events per year. I was appointed on June the 9th this year. And by December 16th, I will have done 46 events. And a lot of that is because they're being done virtually and I don't have to travel. But I do workshops, I do readings. And as I said, the thing that I'm most proud of is my work with incarcerated teens and adults and women in recovery housing throughout Ohio. That has come to be such a blessing and an honor to me. And I love Ohio for its policy of rehabilitation instead of simply thinking in terms of incarceration. And they're trying all sorts of new and wonderful things to help people feel like they can integrate back in to what we might call normal society, although we're all wondering if we live in a normal society as it is, right?
Well,
However,
we're praying.
Yes. So basically I represent Ohio and I represent poetry, and I do the best I can to involve as many poets as I possibly can and lift them up and give them opportunities as well. Thank you for asking.
And then, let's see, Mick, Kent State, in non-poetic and in non, what was it like being there at that seminal time in history?
Frightening. Kent State made it all very real. There was so much division culturally, but actually the National Guard killing college students who were just protesting was just like a nightmare.
That picture that still haunts all of us of the shooting and the woman the student kneeling with her arms up into the air. I mean, it's oh gosh.
There's a woman in the Boom Project whose brother, I think it was shot at Kent State. He lived, but And it's a powerful piece.
And then Mark, what you said just resonated. Am I right that it reflected your experiences growing up in Clarksville?
No, I grew up in Evansville.
All right, Evansville, then I misheard it. But again, part of this Ohio River Valley, where many people probably would have thought that the 60s, the counterculture movement left us all behind. What was it like growing up in Evansville in the late 60s, early 70s?
Well, I guess I don't know that this will answer your question or not. I guess I mostly remember when my parents took me to Nashville to look at Vanderbilt on the just days after the Martin Luther King assassination. And Nashville was shut down. I mean, we had to be back at our Holiday Inn at, I think, maybe 7 o'clock. Broadway was empty. That's my most vivid memory of that era, I suspect.
I learned about it. I had a paper route in 1967, 68, an afternoon paper route that I could do before I went to swim practice. And what I learned in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, in the far western end of the state for delivering the Kentucky New Era was really the United States culture, but seen through a Western Kentucky lens. And having Fort Campbell, the military base 10 miles away, sort of accentuated it all, but it was not a protest culture that in which I grew up. It was more an anti-protest culture, I would say. And I don't mean that in a disparaging way. I just mean that, I lived in a bubble. Let me rephrase that. I lived in a bubble on Vietnam War and national protest issues. I certainly did not live in a bubble on racial justice issues. And much of what I heard, learned, absorbed, and wanted to be as a high schooler in Hopkinsville, in many ways resonates, echoes with what we hear now in the entire anti-racism movement. It's funny how all of this is coming back 52 years later.
Right.
At least. Was Evansville the same way?
Yes, I think so. I feel like I lived in a bubble as well. This is a little off the subject, but I watched 60 Minutes Sunday night, and Ken Burns was interviewed. And I forget how many films he's done, many more than I was aware of, but he said the common thread in his mind to his films is they all deal with racism. The country music, baseball. We watched last night, my wife and I watched The Congress, and racism has just unfortunately been a thread throughout our country's existence, and he picks up on it for sure.
My wife and I watched last night The Help, along the same themes of racism. We're in a church study group that has been watching films on racial justice. And this was like the 6th or 7th film that we've seen, but it's the same thing. And I thought, I knew a little bit of that.
Yeah. I'm sorry. One more thing. My wife and I visited the Memorial for Peace and Justice last summer in Montgomery, Alabama.
In Montgomery.
If anyone ever has an opportunity to see it, they should. It's a moving experience.
And there are Kentucky counties represented in that.
Right.
With lynching recognition.
Yes. Indiana as well.
I want to thank everybody for participating in this program. Kim and Bonnie, I want to thank both of you all so much for the beauty of this anthology, the 47 authors who've done the work. And I want to thank Scott Scarborough at the Filson for encouraging us to move a little bit beyond just history and look at history in a broader context. And maybe that is history through literature. And what you've done is important to everybody who lives in this state and in the Ohio River Valley, Ohio, Indiana. Thank you all so much for this very special evening. Good night.